My dad forced my stepsister to fake a broken leg just to scam me for his addiction money. I'm a 28-year-old man from Massachusetts. Growing up, my relationship with my dad wasn't what you call picture perfect. In fact, it wasn't even close. After my mom died in an accident when I was young, my dad just checked out. He didn't know how to be a single parent, so he left me with my grandparents, my mom's parents. I lived with them as far back as I can remember. My dad would visit occasionally, maybe once a month, but even that dwindled over time. When I was around 10, my dad started dating a woman named Cheryl. He brought her along on some of his visits, saying he wanted me to experience having a mother figure. At the time, I was happy for him. I wanted him to be happy, and Cheryl seemed nice enough. They got married when I was 16. My dad invited me to move in with them in Idaho, but I refused. It wasn't because I didn't want to be with him. I just couldn't leave my grandparents, who had been my rock for so long. After the wedding, my dad still tried to maintain a relationship with me. He'd bring me to Idaho during holidays, and for a while, things seemed okay. A couple of years later, Cheryl gave birth to a baby girl named Lana. My dad promised he'd be the father to her that he never was to me. I wanted to believe him. Fast forward a few years. Cheryl turned out to be a cheater, a manipulator, and a thief. My dad caught her taking his money and spending it on other men. They divorced when I was in college, leaving my dad to raise Lana alone. I worried about him, if he'd fall apart, or if he'd finally step up. He told me he'd do his best for Lana, and for a while, it seemed like he was managing. After I graduated college, I moved back to Utah to live with my grandparents and started freelancing as a web developer. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Soon, I was able to send my dad money to help with Lana. At first, it was just a few $100s a month. Then, as I got a full-time job living in and started making more, I increased it to $1,500, then $3,000, and sometimes even $5,000. I trusted him to use the money responsibly, for Lana, for their bills, and maybe even to save some. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a regular weekday. I was working on a project when my phone buzzed. It was my dad. At first, I thought it was another one of his requests for extra cash. But his voice was frantic. He said he and Lana had been in a car accident. Lana had broken her leg and needed surgery. He didn't have insurance or enough savings to cover the hospital bills. My heart sank. I felt like it failed them. It'd been sending money for years, trusting my dad to save for emergencies like this. But now he was telling me he'd lost his job months ago and had spent the money he'd sent just to make ends meet. Without hesitation, I transferred $31,000 to cover the medical bills. He assured me Lana was recovering and that she'd be fine, though she'd need a wheelchair for a while. Over the next few months, I called often to check on them. My dad always had an excuse for why I couldn't talk to Lana directly. He'd say she was resting, or that the medication made her too tired. I believed him, why wouldn't I? But something felt off. A few months later, I decided to surprise them for Lana's 10th birthday. I took time off work, flew to Idaho, and showed up at their door unannounced. My dad looked shocked. Not the happy kind of shocked, but the kind that made my stomach churn. He was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. As we walked inside, I asked about Lana. He hesitated before saying she was in her room. When I went to see her, she wasn't there. He quickly said she must be gone outside. That's when I noticed something odd, the car parked in their driveway. It was the same car he'd said was totaled in the accident. My heart started racing. Then I asked him which car was parked outside. He said it was his, of course. That's when I reminded him how Head told me he was in an accident with Lana in his car a month ago. He looked genuinely shocked and started stuttering before saying Head just fixed it up at the shop. But if the car wasn't badly damaged enough to be totaled, how had Lana been so seriously injured? Before I could think it through, my dad tried to distract me by asking about work and how living in Massachusetts was going. I told him everything, from how I got my apartment to buying my first car. Some minutes later, Lana came down from her room. She rushed over to me, calling my name, her excitement clear from the look on her face. Jokingly, I told her not to stress her legs too much, we wouldn't want another accident. But she didn't seem amused, which struck me as odd since Shed always loved my jokes during our calls. Maybe Shed changed. My dad interrupted, telling her to go back to her room because we had important things to discuss. I objected, saying I wanted to talk to her more. He insisted, and reluctantly, she went back to her room. Honestly, she felt different, like a stranger almost. Later that evening, I went to check on her before bed. I called her name, but she didn't answer, even though I knew she was awake. I decided to leave, thinking maybe she was upset about what I'd said earlier. The next day, I woke up expecting the house to be quiet with just my dad and me at home. Instead, I found Lana cleaning the living room. Surprised, I asked why she wasn't in school. She paused and said her doctor had recommended staying home to let her leg heal more. It felt strange. If her leg still needed healing after 3 months, how had she run up to me so effortlessly yesterday? And why was she standing and cleaning without any sign of discomfort? I offered to take over the cleaning, and she reluctantly agreed. The day passed without much happening. I spoke with my dad, then drove around the area, scouting a place to take Lana for her upcoming birthday. I picked up some groceries and later prepared a special dinner, one of the only meals I knew how to cook. Both my dad and Lana appreciated it. She even smiled when I told her I had something special planned for her birthday. The next morning, I got up early, ready for our outing. My dad couldn't come along, claiming he had things to do, so it was just me and Lana. I borrowed my dad's car, gave her the dress it bought, and we set off. The ride was quiet, too quiet. Breaking the silence, I told her how proud I was of her strength, how she wasn't letting the accident scare her away from being in a car again. She mumbled something I couldn't quite hear, staring out the window. We reached Silverhood Theme Park, and gradually, her mood lifted. We rode the attractions, and her excitement grew with each one. After hours of fun, we went to a restaurant to eat. She was smiling again, and I took the opportunity to ask how school was going. Her expression darkened as she admitted she missed it but hadn't been able to attend for nearly a year. I was stunned. She explained that my dad hadn't been paying her school fees and that he barely took care of her. She hesitated, then opened up about how the money he'd been sending wasn't going toward her expenses. Instead, my dad was using it to feed his gambling and drinking habits. She even revealed that the car crash had been a complete fabrication, part of a scam to get more money from me. Her voice trembled as she admitted Head forced her to play along. Man, I couldn't explain how shocked I was to find all this out. I couldn't even eat or touch the food I was eating at first. My mind was completely fried with thoughts. I couldn't alter any words out of my mouth to say to her. For like 10 minutes, everywhere was just silent between us. After a while of just looking at my food without touching it, we decided to leave. While in the car driving, I looked around for a little and thought, my dad really isn't the man I thought he was. Then I looked at Lana and just told her I'll fix all this with a strong and bold look on my face. When we got home sometime later, I rushed in to confront my father, thinking he was at home. But when I got inside, I couldn't find him. Lana then told me he usually goes out doing his bad habit and wouldn't be back until the next morning. She went to her room, I told her good night, and I went straight to my room to rest. Throughout the entire night, I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was what Lana said to me about our father, wondering how true it was and if there was more to it, or maybe Lana was just saying things. I was definitely ready to find out. It was probably around 5 or 6 in the morning when I heard a crack at the door. I immediately sprinted to confront him. He looked at me with a funny look on his face and said, "Why are you up so early?" I asked him where Head been, and he said Head just gone over to some buddies to help them with their car. I instantly knew he was lying just from the strong smell of alcohol on his breath and his weird behavior. He looked like he wasn't able to stand well. I told him he smelled like alcohol, but he brushed it off, saying Head had a few beers with his friend and that it wasn't a big deal. As he tried to walk away, I angrily shouted at him, asking why he forced Lana to fake an injury in a fake accident. He froze for a minute and asked how I knew that. I told him it didn't matter and demanded he explain why he forced Lana, lied to me, and manipulated me into giving him money for his gambling and drinking addiction. Honestly, at that moment, I thought he would lie again, but probably because of the alcohol in his body, he admitted it. He started shouting, saying things like, "So what? What if I did? It doesn't change anything." Before he could say more, I shouted back, telling him he was a terrible father. He had failed to take care of me when I was a child, and now had failed Lana, all for some stupid habit. He then told me that stupid habit was the only way to get Lana's mom back. He told me how, after they married, he and her had gone into a financial setback and he started gambling to help their situation. Every paycheck he got, Head wasted all trying to win big. Lana's mom couldn't handle it anymore, and after all the arguments, she left him. He said how that broke him because it was the second time someone he loved left him. He started drinking heavily to compose himself and continued gambling, hoping to hit the jackpot and win her back, even if it meant sacrificing Lana's happiness. I was shocked by everything he said. At the corner of my eye, I saw Lana looking through the door, and she was crying. I couldn't hold the anger in anymore. I really wanted to punch him so hard He'd go to sleep, but I just couldn't. Maybe it was because Lana was watching and I didn't want her to witness physical violence, or maybe because deep down, I still felt he was my father. He walked over to the couch in the living room. By this time, it was about 8 a.m. I came to the conclusion that I wouldn't and couldn't let Lana stay one more day in this prison called home. I shouted at him while he was on the couch, telling him I was taking Lana away from him and never letting him see her again. He didn't react, indicating he didn't care. I went to Lana's room to talk to her. She was in tears. I comforted her, telling her I was going to take her away from him. She looked at me happily and hugged me tight. I then went to my room, grabbed my stuff, and went back to hers to take her out of the house. While we were walking to the door, my dad rushed up to stop us, angrily telling me I couldn't take her away and that he wouldn't let me. I told him if he didn't let us leave peacefully, I would report him to the police for child negligence and He'd go to prison for a long time. He looked me in the eye, said nothing, and walked away, yelling at us to get out. We wasted no time. We got into a bus and headed to my grandparents' place in Utah. It was a long ride, but I talked to Lana throughout, telling her how wonderful my grandparents were. When we got there, they were shocked but excited to see me. They asked who the little girl was. I explained everything. They were both saddened and appalled at what had happened to Lana. I told them I wanted her to stay with them for a while before I could take her to live with me, since I needed some time to prepare. They happily agreed. I introduced her to them, and it was late by then, so I stayed the night. The next day, before leaving back to Massachusetts, I went shopping for clothes and groceries for her and my grandparents. Later, I told Lana and my grandparents goodbye, and they all wished me a safe journey. About 2 months have passed now, and Lana and I have been communicating a lot. She looks genuinely happy at my grandparents' place and always shows it, often asking if she could stay longer. I'll be coming over to my grandparents' house in a week to take her with me, so I'm preparing for that. I've already found a good school for her to attend, as I want to be the good father my dad never was to her. Sometimes I still think about my father and wonder how life would have been if he hadn't thrown his life away.